Commercial beekeepers in the United States began reporting a loss of nearly a third of their hives back during the winter of 2006, and the problem isn't going away. Honeybee die-offs have soared during the past year, and that raises many of the same questions about what is causing this problem and this crisis across the country. Dick Crawford is a beekeeper from Morrisonville, and he is here with us. Dick, nice to see you again. How
Thank
are
you.
you?
Good.
Thanks for coming in. We've been hearing about this for about a decade now, and there have been years where massive amounts of bees have died off. You've had years where you've lost 90, 60,
Yes.
70, 80, 90% of your hives.
Yeah, this fluctuated up and down. It depends on what Mother Nature's doing. Of course, we are messing with Mother Nature a lot, so a lot of it's our own problems.
And suddenly within the past year, there's a lot of concern, and it just wasn't the winter die-off. It wasn't this past winter, but over the past year, say from last spring, 2014 to now, there's been a pretty large amount of bees
Yeah,
lost.
one of the surveys that just came out showed a large kill during the summer of 2014 instead of the winter loss of 14 and 15, which was quite an eye-opener for some of them in terms of the only thing that generally would happen would either be mites or pesticides. And so now the powers to be are really taking a look at what's going on with that and why and how come. And of course, in the Champlain Valley, we're losing a lot of our forage area to corn. And bees don't get much from corn except pollen. And without having a good balanced diet for them to live on, it's making it hard to keep bees alive.
I know the loss of habitat has been a concern for a number of years. Just this week, we heard from the White House, President Obama saying that they're going to get involved and that they want to look at both the die-off of honeybees and the die-off of monarch butterflies. And much of that is going to be looking at habitat.
Yes, yes.
And the loss of habitat for both the monarchs and the honeybees. Forest lands, also grasslands and areas that have been lost. Some of it's been lost to development, some has been lost to crops like corn and other crops like that.
Yeah. Usually when the Northway was put in, all that side grassed areas was always planted in clover and for reconstruction or construction habitat. And now over the years, it's been 20 years or 30 years or longer that's no longer maintaining itself because the clover seeds aren't being replaced and or replenished. And of course, we want to have beautiful roadways. Everybody mows them before it blooms instead of waiting till the flower is done blooming before it can go in and harvest a good honey crop off of that clover and the dandelions.
In recent years, there's been a push to try to delay mowing. Much of it has had to do with the monarch. You've heard groups say, save the monarch, save the milkweed that the monarchs depend on. Please put off mowing if possible until late in the summer. And not a large number of municipalities are doing that, but much of the push has been for the monarch. But maybe people haven't considered at the same time that the honeybees probably depend on much of the same vegetation that the monarchs do.
Yeah, the milkweed does give a good honey crop for us, the beekeepers, as well as the monarch needs that to grow its next generation of butterflies. So yeah, it's something that's got to be looked at for both parts.
And the honeybees, obviously, and with many other plants and flowers along roadways that the honeybees utilize this time of year.
Yeah.
And so I guess much the same thought that if mowing could be delayed, that would preserve that habitat for the honeybees.
Yeah, if it could be delayed till after goldenrod was over or after our first frost. After the first frost, they can cut it right to the ground. It would help it out and let everything bloom for a while to where they can get something to live off for the year.
We know in the past few weeks, again, with the more than 40% die-off in the past year nationwide, it's again raised concerns that if you lose this many honeybees, you're potentially jeopardizing the pollination of crops.
Yes, we've had a continuous loss now for the last couple of decades pretty good, large amounts of bees, and luckily we've been able to replenish a lot of them, but we can only keep that up for so many years in terms of before it really starts catching up with us. I can remember way back in the 60s when Lady Bird Johnson used to decorate or plant all the highways in Texas with wildflowers. And such beautiful roadways, they didn't mow them in April and May, March and April. Bluebonnets, black-eyed Susies from fence line out to the edge of the road. And it was beautiful. And whereas totally different up here, you can't have those plants here, but we could still be planting our roadways with nice colored flowers all along the highways.
And obviously providing food and
good habitat,
that's
being taken away by corn crops.
For the honeybees.
Yeah.
How big of a concern is there among especially apple growers up here? Because that's obviously our cash crop here in the North Country. Has it gotten to a point where they're really concerned about the loss of honeybees?
Well, I probably say yes. I don't have it too much with the migratory beekeepers that come in. There's about 5,000 colonies that are moved into Clinton County during the month of May for just the pollination of the apple orchards. And if they aren't able to get migratory beekeepers out of the south to bring them up here when we need them, if the trees are blooming 2 weeks early and the guys are committed to other contracts down farther south and they can't get them in here, then that's a big problem for them. And so they bring them in here by the tractor trailer loads and leave them here for a period of time, and then from here they move them on to Maine for blueberries. As far as I know, I'm the only one right now locally that's producing any kind of bee volume, that I move mine into one of the local orchardists whenever he calls me, and usually in 4 to 6 hours I'm able to pick them up and move them into his orchard, depending on the time when the trees are blooming.
Have your hives been able to recover? Have you had enough bees to do the pollination in the springtime?
Yes, this past winter was very mild winter loss. Probably one of the better ones I've had in the last 3 to 5 years, and just been able to keep up with them.
So you didn't have the die-off this past winter that you've had in the past few years?
Yeah, I only had a 10% loss, whereas last year I had about 85% loss, and the year before that I had a 95% loss.
And over the past year, have you had they're nearly 40% or more than 40% loss that many of the other beekeepers across the country have had, or has it not been that bad for you?
No, last summer I had probably 5 or 6 of them that were dead when I came out to harvest the honey. The bees had actually left the hive in terms of dying or pesticide kills. We see always a big pesticide kill when dandelions are in bloom at the hives. And it's because the public goes to the box store and buys pesticides and comes and kills the dandelion in bloom because they don't want to see that in their yard. They could kill it a week before bloom, or they could kill it after it's all done blooming, except they see the yellow flower, and that's usually when they go out and do it.
We know that scientists are still trying to pinpoint whether there's a single cause. I think maybe the conventional wisdom now is that there are a number of potential causes that are hurting the honeybees. Certainly pesticides is one that we've been hearing within recent years. The suspicion that insecticides, pesticides may be responsible, at least in a part.
Yeah, pesticides are a big part of it, and also the varroa mite is also a big problem, that the bees, like us, have these mites or ticks or fleas or whatever be the case, that'll bloom and propagate a larger population. And some years they're good, some years they don't. They're not bad at all.
We heard viruses may also be a factor.
It's the mites that are carrying a virus that also attacks the bees. And one of them we see a lot of is deformed wing virus. And that's when the bees literally are born with either no wings, or the wings are deformed, or they'll never fly. And the virus came with the mites, and it attacked the bee. It's not something that the bee gets by itself without the mites as a host.
Again, over the past decade, much of the loss came during the winter, and with the colony collapse, and the thought is that something was causing the bees to leave the hives during the middle of the winter, exposing them to the cold weather and being responsible for a big part of the die-off. But now, over the past year and seeing this during the summer months, this is happening at a time of year where the cold weather isn't responsible, and makes scientists wonder if other factors are.
Yeah, now they're really looking at the other factors that they may have been not paying attention to before, or just overlooking because of that report that all the surveys that were done and turned in, that the summer kill has wound up bigger than what they anticipated.
We know the controversy is also over genetically modified seeds and crops, whether they may be playing a role in this as well. So between them and pesticides, I know that environmentalists tend to look at those two and point to them more than mites and other natural factors at this point.
Keep in mind, we've had genetically altered seeds, for the last 30 and 40 years. And now we're just getting to the point where we're almost modifying almost 100% of our seeds instead of just a few, one or two here and there. Now we just about got everything.
Farmers for many years have used genetically modified
That's correct.
seed for their corn crops. So it's, yes, as you mentioned, it's not something that's just started within the past.
Oh no, it's been ongoing for the last 30 or 40 years.
As we mentioned, the White House saying that it was going to begin this program trying to restore habitat both for the honeybee and for the monarchs, talking about possibly nationally doing more research into pesticides. But I guess with the announcement from the White House this week, many people say that it's getting more national attention that it deserves, that this really is a crisis across the country that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, it is a crisis. We've known it for a while. It's just taken a little bit longer for it to get to the White House. And I think the biggest reason there is because they've actually got bees at the White House now. When the Obamas became president, they actually brought in a hive of bees for Michelle's gardens that are at the White House. And I've talked with the guy that does take care of the bees at the White House. As a matter of fact, this spring they just had a swarm at the White House one day when there was a conference or something going on, and there was a buzz in the air.
Literally.
And they had to realize that it was a swarm of bees doing their natural thing to do. And they had to use the front yard instead of the backyard to do their conference thing with. So,
obviously, you hate to see what's happened over the past decade, but is it good that it's now getting even more national attention and that the focus is on this?
Oh yes, any focus that we can get to find out what's causing the root of the problem would help everybody, monarchs, us, and everything else that's pollinating any plants at all.
Mm-hmm. For now, you're doing okay, both with your hives and locally with the orchards you work with. You have the bees that you need to do what they need to do, and the apple trees are getting pollinated.
Yeah, the apple trees are getting pollinated. I started moving bees back out this morning at 4 o'clock. We do need rain, because if we don't get the rain and keep these green flowers going, we will not have a honey crop come August, because plants have got to have the moisture to give off a nectar. And if we wind up like California, we will not have a honey crop this year.
So that's your biggest worry right now?
Right now, that's my biggest worry. Rain. Pollination is working great. Bees are growing good, but we need rain to keep the flowers green.
For this year.
For this year.
Down the road, though, obviously beekeepers are concerned a decade now that this has been going on, ultimately trying to find more answers and potentially ways to deal with this.
Yes, yeah.
Yep. Dick Crawford, thanks a lot for taking the time to come back and see us. We always appreciate it.
Thank you. Welcome.